obviously living in Wyoming, having some of the biggest winter ranges out west here in Wyoming for deer, elk too, but mostly we're going to talk about deer today. You've kind of taken it upon yourself the last few years to go down to the winter range and take some photos and videos, actually even before the bad winter. So we have kind of a comparison of before the bad winter, and then, you know, we got a couple winters here since that. Why did you take this upon yourself to just go down there and film and take photos?
To me, that's like hallowed ground. And of course I've been, you know, hunting in places like Region G and stuff, and, you know, over the past decade, but I've never made the time to go down during the winter time. Plus we're at trade shows during that time of year. It's hard to get away. But I had a window there where I'm like, I'm going to go down, whether we were going to do it for work or not. And I want to see these deer doing what they're doing down on the winter range, even though it's a fraction of what it used to be back in the heyday that your family videoed. So
yeah, so those that don't know, this actually started a long time ago when my dad, who's 70, I think he's 77 now, when he was in 8th grade, his father, Grandpa Gordon, they jumped in. They moved to Jackson from Washington State, and they jumped in the rig and they went down to Pinedale, Wyoming, because they kept hearing about all these deer, these big deer down there. And they, you know, our family didn't start deer hunting in the 60s. This has been generational. In fact, one of the biggest deer my grandfather killed was actually in Washington. This is what they did. They, you know, eat and breathe and sleep mule deer.
And Washington historically has been big mule deer country.
Yeah, north and east of Seattle, they got huge mule deer. Lots of good habitat, really good genetics. I mean, they have some of the biggest. And now, of course, they've mismanaged it because Washington does that. But they used to have really, really big mule deer. So they jumped in the old Suburban, the 1962 Suburban or whatever it was, and went to Pinedale. And my dad, he says, all I remember is rolling down the window and the hills, the sagebrush hills were just crawling, looked like ants, just deer everywhere. Well, that's 62. That's what they call the heyday of mule deer. It was after World War II. You know, they had completely annihilated all the predators because they were also growing sheep and cattle on this area to feed the war machine. You know, they needed a lot of sheep, a lot of wool blankets, and a lot of wool pants and all that stuff for the war machine. And so they killed all the predators, birds of prey, coyotes, wolves. They poisoned everything out there. Well, that helped the mule deer population significantly. Plus, there were some good winters that happened in the 50s, because there was a really bad winter in 49, some really good winters in the 50s, and this population exploded. And I've heard estimates. I don't know if they're accurate. We'll get into Gary Freilich, who's the biologist down there now. His carrying capacity for that winter range is 40,000 deer. I heard back in the heyday there was 250,000 deer on that winter range, which would be maggots, right?
Yeah.
They were just crawling everywhere. But in the 80s, they started filming these deer, and they found the legendary one. That was Morty, and
the first,
and they found him. I remember the buzz as a kid. I mean, I was probably, I don't know, 6, maybe 7. And the buzz when they found him the second year in a row, and he looked even bigger than he was the year before, and he wintered in the same place, and they found him again. And there's some footage of my dad and my Uncle Rod, you know, they're all bundled up in whites with the camera, and they're taking film of him. Because, you know, you didn't have a zoom, so you had to walk out there, snowshoe out there, and film that deer. And then in the 90s, my dad filmed Popeye, which is probably the most noticeable one. And then, of course, Goliath, and there's a couple others. There's Corkscrew and a couple other deer. And it's actually happened a couple times since then. You know, there's Lumberhead was in Utah, and then there's the King Buck, which is up there. So what did you notice before this big bad winter of 22 to the winter of 22 to what you saw this year?
So that bad winter, the major die-off, and then last winter, so this is February of 2025 right now as we record this. Last winter, 2024, at the same time, or in January, I didn't go back out, partially because we knew the die-off numbers. And even though, because of how they have the winter range shut down, So you can't just be chasing these deer all over the place, which is a good thing. It's still, you try not to disturb them much, and you stick to the main roads, and you're not trouncing through the snow after them or nothing. Yeah, last year, because it was so bad, I didn't even want to go down there then. Even just a little bit, you might be disturbing them when you're on the highway or a county road. It's just, I didn't want to push that envelope. And I think a lot of people that like to look at the deer were in the same situation. And so now this year we'd heard, we've had favorable weather conditions, and we're hearing good reports of what people are seeing. And in fact, we didn't even go into the famous Region G or H at all to look for deer during hunting season, because we're like, let's just let it be for a while. So this winter, I went back down there. Man, was it encouraging what I was seeing. And the anecdotal stuff, I wasn't out there with a counter or nothing. And, we're videoing and taking photos. And I took one of my kids with me that she's interested in the photography stuff, and was teaching her some things, and I had a great time doing it. But the incidental stuff that I was seeing, or the anecdotal stuff, I was like, man, it seems like I'm seeing a lot of fawns to does,
and lots of triplets, and
a lot of up and comer bucks, like we kind of expected. I mean, the volume of really good looking young 4-point mule deer in that 150 to 170 class was amazing. They were everywhere, and so that makes you feel good. Like, man, this next fall, the fall after that, if conditions stay favorable, could be really good. Then Wyoming Game and Fish numbers come out from Gary Freilich and others that backed up the anecdotal stuff that I saw. And, you're talking about, 83 fawns to 100 does, which is up exponentially by a factor of
usually fawn
10.
Usually fawn recruitment's like 25%, 25 to 35. They say 25 is where you've got a healthy population. It's not growth, but it's maintenance. If you get into that 60 to 75%, it's exponential growth. You're in 83. That's huge. That's a huge number, which is awesome.
Yep. And the buck to doe ratios are almost to where the management objective is. So the ratios are good. The numbers are growing. And so if we can get through the rest of this winter without any catastrophic events that are sustained. I mean, a storm is one thing, but a storm that never, in the snow never melts, and the temperatures stay at 20 below zero, and that's where it becomes problematic. Because by the time we get to, say it's February now, you get another month or two into this, and it's still harsh winter. That's when we have problems.
There's a couple other big time winter ranges, and somebody needs to do a story on this one. Back when my dad was outfitting north of Jackson, he tells this funny story that one of the first years he was an outfitter, they'd got a big dump of snow in October, and all the deer tracks, instead of going down the creek like they were going to go to Jackson or go to the Red Desert to winter, all the deer tracks went up the mountain, went up the creek. Mm-hmm. And it took him a couple years to figure out what was going on, because every time, first snow, deer would leave the country. Then they couldn't find any deer, so he learned he had to hunt deer early and then elk later, because the elk do the opposite. The elk go to the elk refuge in Jackson. Mm-hmm. Well, then he moved to this side of the mountain range when I was in 8th grade, and come to find out, those deer, instead of going out to the Red Desert, they go back up over those big, huge mountains and then come down the North Fork of the Shoshone and the South Fork of the Shoshone, and they winter in Cody. And they winter in these big, huge windswept slopes that we have, which is also an astonishing thing. And the Game and Fish Department didn't know they did that. They didn't know that they were hunting, because we could hunt those deer from back then. You could hunt those deer through the month of November. They didn't realize they were killing high mountain deer on the winter, or on the rutting grounds in the winter range here in Cody.
And we've had
killing locals.
And that's not just hearsay. We've had Game and Fish guys in our area here that have told us that. They said, yeah, we remember when Ike Eastman was saying that's the same deer herd, and we thought he was crazy because we just didn't have the data to prove it. Now with GPS collar deer, they know 100% that's what's been happening this whole time. So these poor deer are hunted in the high country,
September, October, November.
They just never got a moment's rest. And so, locally here, we were thinking, or not we, but I mean the Game and Fish at the time was thinking, well, those are just, deer from up in the immediate mountains right there. They just came down. And no.
Yeah, it's the deer in Jackson that they were getting hunted with a rifle September 15th.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That's unbelievable. So, but with all this information, they're starting to do management plans and change season dates and change tag allocations that help them maintain those deer populations better, those carrying capacities better. And it's good to see all these winter ranges are in such good shape. What do you think? From your opinion, let's say we're at 11,000, carrying capacity is 40 in the Red Desert. How long do you think it's going to take? Is it going to take 10 years? Are we ever going to see it?
Well, obviously it's just highly weather dependent. There's a lot of other factors too, like highway crossings and other conservation projects. Like Game and Fish is doing, Muley Fanatics are doing, Mule Deer Foundation's doing, Wyoming Wildlife Federation is involved with and helping and doing and being an advocate for the deer. It's like the perfect storm that eliminates a population, or what's facing mule deer is the perfect storm. There's like half a dozen factors. If we have some mitigation, for lack of better terms, in these factors, some stuff we can't control. We can't control the weather. Hopefully we have good weather patterns for the next few years. And then, you hear about the wildlife crossings, if there's more of those going across highways so deer aren't getting killed on the highway. If fencing projects are being done, which Scott Reekers just read us a whole list of projects that Muley Fanatics is involved with for wildlife friendly fence, which really isn't that monumental of a task to do, but it can be done so that they're not getting hung up in the barbed wire. If all of this stuff is happening at the same time, which it is, and the biggest thing for at least the Wyoming, like the Region G, Region H herd, the Wyoming range herd, the Sublette herd was what they call them. If we get the right weather for the next couple of years, look at how much is recovered just in 2 years, or a year and a half, really.
Right.
If we get this for another 3 years, oh man. These deer are, reproducing exponentially, and they're surviving to the next year, which is a good thing. And so if that happens, in short order, we could have the deer numbers back up to where they want to be, or where they need to be. But it's that darn Wyoming winter, you just never know. And so it's just been the perfect storm. And so if we can do things, help with wildlife friendly fences, maybe choose a smarter place for a subdivision and how that development works. Oil and gas development, a lot of oil and gas companies are really proactive when it comes to wildlife friendly things that they're trying to do, especially over the last, I'd say 15 years. They're really conscious of that. Plus, a lot of the guys who work in the oil patch, they're hunters, man. Yeah. They want to see the wildlife survive. So everybody, it just feels like everybody's finally coming to the table to talk together instead of, no, that industry's bad and that industry's bad and that industry's bad. They're all fighting and nobody's actually coming together. And then at the same time, we got people like Casey Stemler, who used to be with the Department of Interior, and he was instrumental in the funding behind the migration initiative. And so you have the perfect storm. You have the funding coming into play with people of all walks of life finally talking about landscape scale, multi-year projects, not just a project for 6 months because some 23-year-old needs to finish their grad study. That's always been a pet peeve of mine with the wildlife management field. All these great things start, but then somebody gets their master's degree and that's all they needed from it anyway, so it goes away and there's no more funding for it.
Right.
And it's a waste of resources. Well, that's changing slowly because, again, there's money to apply to a lot of this stuff, or there has been. So, it's an interesting time.
It's going to be interesting with the new administration to see what comes out of that. We know what the past administration and the previous before that was dumping money into wildlife conservation, maybe not in the right places, but they were doing it. It's going to be interesting to see once all the cards are dealt and they start playing this game, what's going to happen there. Because that's what you said, the money. That was a key thing, and that money came from the federal government. Which comes from all of us.